Sarah Mitchell had always been fascinated by military stories. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she spent countless hours reading about heroic missions, elite special forces, and the brotherhood that existed among warriors. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, would share tales of courage and sacrifice that captivated her young mind. However, Sarah's own military experience was far from the glamorous stories she had grown up hearing. At 18, Sarah enlisted in the Navy with dreams of adventure and purpose. Reality hit hard during basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station. The rigorous physical demands, mental pressure, and strict discipline were overwhelming. Sarah found herself struggling to keep up with her peers, often finishing last in physical fitness tests and barely passing written examinations. Her drill instructors were harsh, constantly reminding her that she wasn't cut out for military life. After completing basic training, Sarah was assigned to an administrative role at a naval base in Virginia. Her duties involved filing paperwork, managing supply inventories, and performing other mundane office tasks. The work was tedious and felt far removed from the exciting military career she had envisioned. While her fellow sailors went on deployments and participated in training exercises, Sarah remained behind, processing their leave requests and equipment orders. The disconnect between her reality and her dreams grew larger each day. Sarah watched as real Navy SEALs occasionally visited the base for briefings and equipment pickup. Their confidence, physical presence, and the respect they commanded from everyone around them made her feel inadequate. These elite warriors represented everything she wished she could be but knew she never would become. After 2 years of unsatisfying service, Sarah received an honorable discharge due to a minor medical condition with her knee. The injury wasn't severe, but it provided an easy exit from a military career that had never lived up to her expectations. Returning to civilian life in her hometown, Sarah felt lost and directionless. She had no college degree, limited job skills, and a growing sense that she had wasted the best years of her youth. Sarah found work at a local hardware store, spending her days helping customers find screws, paint, and garden tools. The job paid minimum wage and offered little in terms of personal fulfillment. In the evenings, she would return to her small apartment and lose herself in military documentaries and online forums where veterans shared their experiences. She became particularly obsessed with Navy SEAL operations, reading every book and watching every documentary she could find about their training and missions. The more Sarah learned about SEAL operations, the more she began to fantasize about having been part of that elite community. She started telling small lies to coworkers and acquaintances, claiming she had been stationed in more exciting locations than she actually had been. These minor fabrications felt harmless at first, just a way to make her boring military experience sound more interesting. One evening at a local bar, Sarah met Tom, a construction worker who was fascinated by military stories. When he asked about her service, Sarah found herself claiming she had been in special operations. The lie came out so naturally that she surprised herself. Tom's eyes lit up with admiration and respect, hanging on every word as she spun an elaborate tale about classified missions and dangerous operations. The attention and respect Sarah received from that one conversation was intoxicating. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt important and valued. Tom bought her drinks all night and introduced her to his friends as a war hero. Sarah knew she should correct the misunderstanding, but the feeling of being admired was too powerful to give up. Word spread quickly through their small town about Sarah's supposed military heroics. People who had barely acknowledged her existence before suddenly wanted to hear her stories. Local veterans invited her to their gatherings, and she was asked to speak at community events. Each time, Sarah embellished her tales a little more, adding details about combat operations and classified missions that she had learned from documentaries and books. Sarah began visiting military surplus stores to acquire authentic-looking gear that would support her fabricated identity. She purchased tactical clothing, patches, and equipment that she had seen real SEALs wearing in photographs and videos. The store owners, impressed by her supposed credentials, often gave her discounts and shared their own military stories. Sarah absorbed every detail, adding them to her growing repertoire of fictional experiences. The lies became increasingly elaborate as Sarah's reputation grew. She claimed to have served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, participating in high-stakes rescue missions and intelligence-gathering operations. She described firefights, hostage rescues, and covert insertions behind enemy lines with such detail that even experienced veterans were impressed by her supposed expertise. Sarah's transformation was complete when she began wearing her tactical gear in public. The respect she commanded while dressed as an elite warrior was unlike anything she had experienced in her real military service. Store clerks thanked her for her service, restaurant servers refused to let her pay for meals, and strangers approached her on the street to shake her hand and express their gratitude. The psychological rewards of her deception were enormous, but Sarah knew she was walking a dangerous path. She lived in constant fear that someone would expose her lies, yet she couldn't stop herself from continuing the charade. The identity she had created felt more real to her than her actual life, and she found herself believing her own stories more each day. As months passed, Sarah's fictional military career became increasingly sophisticated. She memorized military terminology, studied tactical procedures, and even practiced military bearing and communication styles. Her performance was so convincing that even experienced veterans rarely questioned her claims. She had successfully transformed herself from a failed administrative clerk into a respected special operations warrior, at least in the eyes of her community. However, Sarah's carefully constructed world was about to be challenged in ways she never anticipated. Her growing reputation was attracting attention beyond her small town, and soon she would face scrutiny from people with the knowledge and authority to expose her elaborate deception. The foundation of lies she had built was solid enough to fool civilians and even some veterans, but it would not withstand examination by those who truly understood the world she was pretending to inhabit. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either validate Sarah's fictional identity or destroy everything she had built. Her skills as a deceiver were about to be tested by experts who could spot a fake from across a room. The question was whether her extensive preparation and natural talent for deception would be enough to survive scrutiny from those who knew the truth about what it really meant to be a Navy SEAL. Sarah's journey from disappointed administrative clerk to celebrated war hero was a testament to the power of reinvention and the human need for respect and admiration. But every lie eventually faces a moment of truth, and Sarah's moment was rapidly approaching. The elaborate fiction she had created was about to collide with reality in a way that would change her life forever, one way or another. Sarah's reputation as a former Navy SEAL had grown far beyond what she had ever imagined possible. What started as a simple lie in a local bar had evolved into a comprehensive alternate identity that was now attracting attention from military organizations, veteran support groups, and even media outlets interested in her story. The small-town hardware store clerk had become a local celebrity, invited to speak at schools, veteran events, and patriotic gatherings throughout the region. The transformation required constant vigilance and preparation. Sarah spent hours each night researching military operations, studying photographs of authentic SEAL equipment, and memorizing details about bases, training facilities, and operational procedures. Her apartment had become a shrine to her fictional military career, filled with authentic gear purchased from surplus stores and carefully placed awards and certificates that she had crafted to support her story. Sarah's attention to detail was remarkable. She had created a complete timeline of her supposed military service, including specific dates of deployments, names of units she claimed to have served with, and detailed descriptions of missions she allegedly participated in. She studied maps of Afghanistan and Iraq, memorizing geographic features and local customs that she would reference in her stories. Her knowledge was so extensive that she could answer most questions about military life with confidence and accuracy. The psychological aspects of maintaining her deception became increasingly complex as Sarah found herself living two completely different lives. During the day, she worked her mundane job at the hardware store, helping customers with their home improvement projects and stocking shelves with screws and paint. But, in the evenings and weekends, she transformed into Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell, decorated combat veteran and special operations warrior. The respect and admiration Sarah received in her false identity was intoxicating. Local veterans who had initially been skeptical gradually accepted her as one of their own after hearing her detailed stories and observing her military bearing. She was invited to join exclusive veteran organizations and participated in honor guard ceremonies at military funerals. The sense of belonging and purpose she felt in these moments was unlike anything she had experienced during her actual military service. Sarah's confidence grew with each successful performance. She developed a repertoire of stories that she could adapt to different audiences, ranging from humorous anecdotes about training mishaps to serious accounts of life and death combat situations. Her storytelling skills were natural and compelling, drawing listeners in with vivid descriptions and emotional depth that made her fictional experiences feel authentic and real. The financial benefits of her deception were modest but meaningful for someone earning minimum wage. Grateful community members often bought her meals, local businesses offered her discounts, and she occasionally received small donations from people who wanted to support a war hero. While money was never Sarah's primary motivation, these gestures reinforced the value that others placed on her supposed sacrifices and service. Sarah's knowledge of military culture and terminology became increasingly sophisticated through her constant research and interactions with real veterans. She learned to speak the language of special operations, understanding the nuances of tactical communication and the cultural codes that define military relationships. Her ability to discuss complex military topics with apparent expertise convinced even experienced veterans that she belonged in their exclusive fraternity. The challenges of maintaining her deception were enormous and constantly evolving. Sarah had to remember hundreds of details about her fictional military career, ensuring that her stories remained consistent across different audiences and occasions. She developed a detailed personal journal where she recorded every story she told, noting which details she had shared with which people to avoid contradictions that might expose her lies. Technology presented both opportunities and threats to Sarah's carefully constructed identity. Social media allowed her to connect with veterans nationwide and share her stories with larger audiences, but it also created permanent records of her claims that could be scrutinized by skeptical observers. Sarah learned to navigate these digital waters carefully, sharing just enough information to maintain credibility while avoiding details that could be easily verified or debunked. The emotional toll of living a lie began to weigh heavily on Sarah as her deception became more elaborate and widespread. She experienced constant anxiety about being discovered, and the guilt of deceiving good people who genuinely respected and cared about her well-being was sometimes overwhelming. Yet she felt trapped by the web of lies she had created, unable to confess the truth without destroying the relationships and respect she had worked so hard to build. Sarah's relationship with her family became strained as her fictional military career overshadowed her real life and accomplishments. Her parents were proud of their daughter's supposed heroism but confused by her reluctance to discuss certain aspects of her service. She claimed that many details were classified, using the secrecy requirements of special operations to deflect questions that might expose inconsistencies in her stories. The veteran community that had embraced Sarah began to rely on her for support and guidance. Younger veterans sought her advice about dealing with civilian life after military service, and she found herself offering counseling and mentorship based on experiences she had never actually had. The irony of a fake veteran helping real veterans process their genuine trauma and challenges was not lost on Sarah, but she continued to play her role because people genuinely seemed to benefit from her attention and encouragement. Sarah's equipment and appearance became increasingly authentic as she invested more money and effort into maintaining her false identity. She acquired genuine military-issued gear through online marketplaces and surplus stores, studying photographs and videos to ensure that every piece of equipment was appropriate for someone of her supposed rank and specialization. Her attention to detail extended to minor elements like the way she wore her uniform items and the specific placement of patches and insignia. Local law enforcement officers, many of whom were military veterans themselves, began to include Sarah in their social circles and professional discussions. Her supposed experience with tactical operations made her a valued consultant on security matters, and she found herself advising police departments on equipment purchases and training procedures. The responsibility and trust placed in her by these professional relationships added another layer of complexity to her deception. The media attention Sarah received started small but gradually expanded as her reputation spread. Local newspapers wrote feature stories about her service, and she was interviewed on regional radio programs about veteran issues and military life. Each media appearance required careful preparation to ensure that her stories remained consistent and convincing, but also provided additional validation for her false identity among people who might have been skeptical. Sarah's success in maintaining her deception for over a year had given her confidence that she could continue indefinitely. She had successfully fooled hundreds of people, including experienced military veterans and law enforcement professionals. Her knowledge and preparation were so thorough that she genuinely believed she could pass any casual scrutiny. However, she was about to encounter a level of expertise and authority that would test her deception in ways she had never anticipated. The seeds of Sarah's eventual confrontation were already being planted as her reputation attracted attention from higher levels of military and veteran organizations. People with direct knowledge of Navy SEAL operations and training were beginning to hear her name and stories, and some were asking questions that would lead them directly into her path. The elaborate web of lies that had served Sarah so well was about to be examined by experts who possessed the knowledge and authority to unravel every thread of her carefully constructed fiction. #The General arrives. The invitation to speak at the Regional Veterans Conference was the pinnacle of Sarah's fabricated military career. The event was scheduled to take place at a major convention center in the state capital, with an expected attendance of over 2,000 veterans, active duty personnel, and military supporters. Sarah had been specifically requested to deliver a keynote address about the challenges faced by female special operations personnel, a topic that organizers felt she was uniquely qualified to discuss based on her supposed combat experience. Sarah spent weeks preparing for what she considered the most important performance of her deceptive career. She carefully crafted a speech that would highlight the supposed barriers she had overcome as a woman in the male-dominated world of special operations, drawing from real accounts she had read online and in military publications. Her presentation would include specific examples of discrimination she had allegedly faced and the strategies she had used to earn respect from her male colleagues. The convention center was impressive in its scale and organization. Military displays filled the exhibition halls, with vendors selling everything from tactical equipment to patriotic memorabilia. The atmosphere was charged with pride and camaraderie as hundreds of veterans reconnected with former colleagues and shared stories of their service. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety as she walked through the crowds, receiving nods of recognition from people who had heard of her reputation. Sarah's equipment for the conference was her most authentic collection yet. She wore dress blues that she had acquired through careful online shopping, complete with the appropriate ribbons and decorations for someone of her supposed rank and service history. Her tactical gear, displayed on a nearby table, represented months of research and purchasing from military surplus dealers who specialized in genuine Navy SEAL equipment. Every piece had been carefully selected to support her story and demonstrate her supposed expertise. The morning of her scheduled presentation, Sarah noticed an unusual level of activity among the conference organizers. Military police were stationed at various entrances, and there seemed to be more active duty personnel in attendance than had been expected. Word spread quickly through the veteran community that several high-ranking officers were planning to attend, including a two-star general who had recently returned from a deployment in the Middle East. General Marcus Thompson was a legendary figure in special operations circles. His 30-year career included multiple combat deployments, command positions in elite units, and direct oversight of Navy SEAL operations throughout the global war on terror. He had personally known many of the operators who had achieved fame through high-profile missions, and his knowledge of special operations personnel and procedures was encyclopedic. The general's unexpected attendance at the conference was generating considerable excitement among the veteran community. Sarah's initial reaction to news of the general's presence was concern rather than fear. She had successfully deceived hundreds of people, including experienced veterans and military professionals, and she felt confident that her preparation and performance would withstand scrutiny from even a high-ranking officer. However, she made subtle adjustments to her planned presentation, removing some of the more specific operational details that might attract unwanted attention from someone with direct knowledge of SEAL procedures. The general's arrival at the convention center was accompanied by a small entourage of aides and security personnel. Despite his high rank, General Thompson moved through the crowds with ease, stopping to speak with individual veterans and examining the various displays with genuine interest. His reputation for being approachable and down-to-earth made him popular among enlisted personnel, and soon he was surrounded by groups of veterans eager to share their own service stories. Sarah watched the general from a distance as he moved through the exhibition area, noting his confident bearing and the obvious respect he commanded from everyone around him. She had seen high-ranking officers before during her real military service, but never someone with such direct authority over the special operations community she was pretending to have been part of. The realization that she would likely interact with him at some point during the conference created a new level of anxiety about maintaining her deception. When General Thompson approached the area where Sarah's tactical equipment was displayed, she felt her heart rate increase significantly. The general moved slowly through the exhibition, stopping to examine various pieces of military gear with the eye of someone who understood the practical applications of each item. Other conference attendees gathered around him, hoping to engage in conversation or simply observe a living legend of special operations. The general's examination of Sarah's equipment was thorough and methodical. He picked up individual pieces of gear, examining markings, serial numbers, and manufacturing details with obvious expertise. His questions to other vendors were specific and technical, demonstrating a deep understanding of how equipment was issued, modified, and used in operational environments. Sarah realized that the general was not simply making polite conversation but was conducting a professional assessment of the displays. When General Thompson finally reached Sarah's table, she forced herself to maintain the confident demeanor that had served her so well throughout her deception. The general's initial greeting was professional but friendly, and he began examining her gear with the same methodical approach he had used at other displays. Sarah positioned herself to answer any questions he might have, drawing on her extensive research to provide knowledgeable responses about the equipment's specifications and applications. The general's first questions were routine and easily answered from Sarah's prepared knowledge base. He asked about specific pieces of communication equipment, tactical clothing modifications, and weapon accessories that were displayed on her table. Sarah's responses were confident and detailed, reflecting the months of research she had invested in understanding the technical aspects of special operations equipment. The general nodded approvingly at her answers, seemingly impressed by her expertise. However, as the general's examination continued, his questions became more specific and personal. He began asking about the circumstances under which Sarah had acquired certain pieces of equipment, the modifications she had made to adapt gear for her specific operational requirements, and the units she had served with that had access to particular specialized items. These questions required Sarah to think quickly and draw connections between her fictional service history and the physical evidence displayed before them. Sarah's responses became more elaborate as she attempted to satisfy the general's increasingly detailed inquiries. She described specific missions where certain equipment had been essential, modifications she had supposedly made to improve functionality in desert environments, and the process through which special operations personnel acquired and maintained their gear. Her storytelling skills served her well as she wove together technical knowledge and fictional experiences into compelling narratives. The crowd around Sarah's display grew larger as other conference attendees realized they were witnessing a conversation between two special operations veterans with extensive combat experience. The general's presence lent credibility to Sarah's supposed expertise, and people began asking her to explain various pieces of equipment and their applications in real-world scenarios. Sarah found herself conducting an impromptu technical seminar, drawing on her research to provide detailed explanations of tactical procedures and equipment usage. The general's body language remained neutral throughout the extended conversation, but Sarah noticed that his questions were becoming more focused on specific operational details that would be known only to personnel with direct experience in particular units and time periods. He asked about changes in equipment issued to different SEAL teams, modifications made in response to specific threats encountered in various theaters of operation, and the evolution of tactical procedures over the course of multiple deployments. Sarah's confidence began to waver as she realized that the general's questions were testing knowledge that went far beyond what she could have learned from books, documentaries, and online research. The operational details he was asking about required first-hand experience or direct access to classified information that would not be available to someone researching SEAL operations from public sources. She found herself making increasingly educated guesses about technical details, hoping that her general knowledge would be sufficient to maintain her credibility. The turning point in their conversation came when General Thompson picked up a specific piece of communication equipment and asked about its usage in a particular operational context. The question was so specific and technical that Sarah realized she was facing a level of expertise that her research had not prepared her to handle. The general was not simply making conversation or testing her general knowledge but was conducting what amounted to a professional examination of her supposed qualifications and experience. Sarah's response to this critical question would determine whether she could continue her deception or whether her elaborate fiction would finally be exposed by someone with the authority and knowledge to recognize the truth. The months of preparation, the carefully acquired equipment, and the hundreds of successful performances had led to this single moment of ultimate scrutiny. Everything she had built through her lies was about to be tested by the one person at the conference who possessed the exact knowledge needed to separate truth from fiction in the world of Navy SEAL operations. The moment of truth. The silence that followed General Thompson's technical question seemed to stretch forever as Sarah struggled to formulate a response that would not expose her deception. The communication device in his hands was specialized equipment that she had purchased from a surplus dealer, but her knowledge of its actual operational applications was limited to what she had been able to research online. The general's question required specific technical knowledge that could only come from direct experience using the device in combat situations. Sarah's mind raced as she considered her options. She could attempt to bluff her way through with a general answer, hoping that the technical details would be close enough to reality to satisfy the general's inquiry. Alternatively, she could claim that the information was classified and deflect the question entirely, though such a response might generate more suspicion than it would resolve. The growing crowd of observers around her display added pressure to provide a convincing response quickly. Before Sarah could answer, General Thompson set down the communication device and picked up a tactical vest that formed the centerpiece of her equipment display. The vest was genuine military-issued gear that had cost Sarah nearly 2 months' salary from the hardware store, but, as the general examined it closely, his expression began to change. His professional interest was gradually being replaced by something that looked more like recognition, and Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. The general's examination of the tactical vest was even more methodical than his previous inspections. He checked manufacturing labels, serial numbers, and specific design features with the focus of someone who was comparing what he was seeing against his own detailed knowledge. His questions about the vest were no longer casual inquiries but probing examinations that seemed designed to verify specific details about its history and usage. Sarah realized that she was facing a crisis that her months of preparation had not anticipated. The general was not simply testing her knowledge but was examining her equipment with the expertise of someone who had direct familiarity with how such gear was issued, modified, and used by actual SEAL personnel. His growing suspicion was becoming apparent to the crowd of observers, who began to sense that something unusual was happening in their conversation. When General Thompson asked Sarah about the specific unit that had issued her the tactical vest, she knew that her carefully constructed deception was approaching its final moments. The question required knowledge of internal military procedures and unit designations that were not available through public research. Sarah attempted to provide a general answer about special operations procurement procedures, but her response lacked the specificity and confidence that had characterized her earlier explanations. The general's next action caught Sarah completely off guard. He reached into his pocket and withdrew his official military identification, showing it briefly to Sarah before asking to see her own military credentials. The request was made quietly and professionally, but it represented a direct challenge to her supposed authority and legitimacy as a special operations veteran. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized that she had no authentic documentation to support her claims. Sarah attempted to explain that she did not carry her military identification to civilian events, claiming that special operations personnel were advised to maintain operational security by avoiding displays of official credentials in public settings. The explanation was plausible enough to satisfy most observers, but General Thompson's expression indicated that he was not convinced by her deflection. His knowledge of actual security procedures allowed him to recognize the inadequacy of her excuse. The crowd around Sarah's display had grown larger as word spread that a high-ranking general was conducting an extended examination of her equipment and credentials. The audience included many experienced veterans who were beginning to pick up on the subtle signs that something was amiss in the conversation. The respectful attention that Sarah had initially received was gradually being replaced by curious scrutiny as observers noted the general's increasingly skeptical demeanor. General Thompson's final test came when he asked Sarah to demonstrate proper assembly procedures for a specific piece of tactical equipment. The request seemed reasonable to casual observers, but it required muscle memory and practiced expertise that could only come from extensive hands-on training with the device. Sarah had studied the equipment's specifications thoroughly, but she had never actually used it in operational conditions or received formal training on its deployment procedures. Sarah's attempt to demonstrate the equipment assembly was technically accurate but lacked the smooth efficiency that would characterize someone with genuine experience. Her movements were hesitant and mechanical, reflecting book knowledge rather than practical expertise. General Thompson watched her demonstration silently, but his professional eye could easily distinguish between theoretical understanding and actual operational competence. The moment of final revelation came when General Thompson asked Sarah a simple question about her supposed SEAL training. He mentioned a specific training exercise that all SEAL personnel would have experienced during their qualification course, asking her to describe her memories of the event. The question seemed innocuous to observers, but it was actually a test that no amount of research could have prepared Sarah to pass. Sarah's response revealed the fundamental flaw in her elaborate deception. Despite months of research and preparation, she lacked the shared experiences and cultural knowledge that connected genuine SEAL personnel to each other and to their training. Her answer was technically informed but emotionally hollow, lacking the personal details and visceral memories that would characterize someone who had actually endured the grueling training process she was claiming to have completed. General Thompson's conclusion was swift and decisive. He thanked Sarah for her time and quietly requested that she accompany him to a private area where they could continue their conversation away from the crowd of observers. The professional courtesy he showed did not disguise the fact that Sarah's deception had been thoroughly exposed by someone with the exact knowledge and authority needed to separate truth from fiction in the special operations community. As they moved away from the exhibition area, Sarah felt the weight of her elaborate lies collapsing around her. The months of careful preparation, the expensive equipment, and the hundreds of successful performances had ultimately been insufficient to withstand scrutiny from someone with direct knowledge of the world she was pretending to inhabit. The respect and admiration she had cultivated through her deception was about to be replaced by shame and consequences she had never fully considered. The general's private conversation with Sarah was brief but definitive. He explained that his examination of her equipment and responses to his questions had revealed inconsistencies that could only be explained by fabrication. His knowledge of SEAL procedures, equipment, and training was encyclopedic, allowing him to recognize immediately that Sarah's supposed expertise was based on research rather than experience. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. However, General Thompson's response to discovering Sarah's deception was more nuanced than she had expected. Rather than publicly exposing her lies or demanding immediate legal consequences, he chose to address the situation with a combination of professional disappointment and human understanding. He recognized that Sarah's motivations, while misguided, reflected a genuine desire for respect and purpose that had been misdirected into harmful deception. The general's final words to Sarah were both a condemnation of her actions and an opportunity for redemption. He explained that her lies had dishonored the memory of real special operations personnel who had made genuine sacrifices in service to their country. However, he also offered her the chance to make amends by confessing her deception and using her experience to help others understand the importance of honoring military service truthfully. Sarah's response to being exposed was a mixture of relief and terror. The constant anxiety of maintaining her elaborate lies was finally over, but she now faced the prospect of losing everything she had built through her deception. The respect of her community, the relationships she had formed, and the identity she had carefully constructed were all threatened by the truth that General Thompson had uncovered through his expertise and authority. The general's decision to handle Sarah's exposure privately rather than publicly reflected his understanding of the complex human motivations that had led to her deception. While her lies were inexcusable and harmful, he recognized that destroying her completely would serve no constructive purpose. Instead, he chose to give her the opportunity to take responsibility for her actions and work toward making genuine amends for the damage she had caused. Sarah's elaborate deception had finally met its match in General Thompson's expertise and authority. Her months of careful preparation and successful performances had been no match for the real knowledge and experience of someone who had actually lived the life she was pretending to have experienced. The confrontation marked the end of her fictional identity as a decorated special operations veteran and the beginning of a more difficult but ultimately more honest journey toward redemption and genuine purpose.